Have you ever noticed camera movement's ability to completely captivate? The way a move can immerse us in the subjectivity of a character.
I love you, Harry. 我哋唔好好似佢哋咁嘅。聽見啦。
How the repetition of a subtle retreat of a camera can be devastating.
What was his name? The Departed.
Miles Kennefic. You do not want to miss it if Costello takes a dump.
The way in which it can make us an accomplice in a game of cat and mouse.
Tell him to point out on this map the German position. Dann zeig uns auf der Karte, wo die deutsche Stellung ist.
The way a pullout can feel like finally being able to exhale. Or a tracking shot filled with joy. How the camera can slowly push in, or appear to effortlessly glide in a moment of pure bliss. How a watchful eye can be suggested with an alternating pan. And let's not forget the many meanings implicit in the dolly zoom. But what all these camera movements have in common is that they are conventional. Not conventional as in boring, conventional because they are in direct response to the narrative and characters on screen. A character walks, we follow. Anticipation in an arc. As characters travel, we truck. It can also be emotional, a slow dolly in for internal conflict. Take this famous dolly zoom from Jaws. Brody's worst fear is a shark attack.
Beach is closed. No swimming. By order of the Amity PD.
This fear is realized, and so we get this moment. The perfect embodiment of sheer panic. A movement that encapsulates the character's exact emotions. Which is a long way of saying, I want to look at the opposite kind of camera motion. One where the movement almost seems to be operating from outside of the narrative, where instead of assimilating the move within the story, it's almost as if the move itself becomes the object of our attention. This may sound a bit confusing, but for our purposes, I'll be referring to this as the camera breach, or what French film critic and director Alexandre Astruc defined as that imperceptible rift between the work and the author, the means by which the author takes a stance in relation to it.
Okay, that's
Thank
fine,
you.
Jack.
I'm sorry.
No problem. So we'll call you right back, okay?
Terrific.
Okay.
You see, we as viewers are smart. We are film literate, and we are not coming to this experience in a vacuum, having never experienced film. So when a camera suddenly starts a pan like this, well, we have expectations for the meaning behind such a move. So when we find ourselves here, it sort of draws our attention to the move itself, occupying this liminal space between the narrative, and yet also somehow commenting on it. With a breach, the camera can take on a point of view almost of its own, panning around a room where neither the frame we've panned from, nor the frame we pan to, seems to elucidate the meaning behind the move. It is present in this type of pan, where we look away slowly, only to be confronted with a lamp. Or a slow dolly that is never narratively clarified, and yet somehow tells us all we need to know. Perhaps it's even the way a film can choose to show us everything but the thing we expect to see.
Patron!
Here I want to focus on the camera that, in its move, makes us wonder. Why'd the camera do that? And chief among this cinematic grammar is the way a movement can become the signature of a director's style.
Ladies and gentlemen, by way of introduction, this is a film about trickery.
Think of the way Fincher's camera almost obsessively follows the characters. Well, until it doesn't. Here, such camera movements become associated with a filmmaker's authorial presence. Take Wells's elaborate craning shots.
But you're my type of woman.
Or Hitchcock's shifting of the camera's gaze away from the narrative focus during a pivotal moment. For Kubrick, such authorial presence can be felt in his use of one-point perspectives, extreme wide-angle lenses, and long tracking shots. In his 1980 film, The Shining, he was able to take these hallmarks one step further by using the recently introduced Steadicam.
That film cemented the usefulness of the Steadicam for all time. That film was where I learned my trade. You know, all those takes were brilliant. The quality of the motion of the Steadicam in that film, which is supernaturally smooth. That doesn't feel like a normal objective movie moving shot, which are, you know, God's eye view, the director's eye view, whatever. They feel like the hotel's eye view.
Here, Kubrick's camera eerily glides as we follow Danny through the hallways of the Overlook Hotel. It feels like the camera knows what's around the corner, knows something the characters don't. It's operating outside the narrative, but far from separate from it. However, in allowing the camera to wander in this way, sometimes it appears to not even know what to expect.
Now, this was the very first shot I thought of, and I thought it was important
maybe you had a virus
because of what happens in it. Keeping it on him, it was so uncomfortable for him, this conversation.
Well,
so painful.
A cup of coffee? I come by the
and holding it on him. And he's just getting refused and rejected and rejected and rejected.
Okay.
And the camera starts to move
You didn't get them. I send
through the hall,
flowers.
as if it's about to reveal something. And it doesn't.
Well,
the idea is that there's a sense, again, of anxiety, a sense of uneasiness, of the camera tracking to an empty hall. It was the idea of keeping the audience off balance all the time. And that was the piece. All the other shots came from that concept that's in that shot right now.
Of the shot, film critic Pauline Kael noted its similarities in style to another filmmaker.
Ladies and gentlemen, Michelangelo Antonioni.
When discussing Antonioni's work, Scorsese stated, "There's this parallel move that he makes which is so detached, yet has such spiritual power. It made me stop and look. He was showing the world in a different way."
Thank you all, and thank you, Martin. You gave us great joys and strength. On behalf of Michelangelo, I thank you very, very much.
Such camera work can often feel like it's about to reveal something to the audience, moving away from the characters in main action and onto some extraneous object or location. However, here the move only functions to further obscure meaning. Michelangelo Antonioni was the master of this type of camera work. His panning and tracking shots are nothing new, and yet they feel different from any other filmmaker. They breach our expectations, almost lingering outside the narrative and alienating his characters within. One of the main themes of his 1975 film The Passenger is objectivity, and the film itself plays with this notion, both from the perspective of a journalist making a documentary and Antonioni himself making the film.
You can ask me the same questions as before.
In the final scene of the film, Antonioni's goal was to seamlessly transition from a subjective point of view to an objective one, without any cuts. In the scene, as in many of Antonioni's films, the camera has a presence that makes us aware of it. The tracking camera acts as a breach by moving in a way that is neither tied to Locke nor the narrative. In this transition from subjective to objective, it makes us aware of its existence and, like the scene in Taxi Driver, has us anticipating some grand revelation. However, as it slowly pulls out of Locke's hotel room, completing a semicircle pan across the piazza before returning to his window, it becomes clear that in this film, the camera work refuses to provide us with any meaning at all.
Did you recognize him?
I never knew him.
Do you recognize him?
Yes.
Where Hitchcock's camera breaches the narrative to conceal details that are gradually revealed as his films progress, Antonioni's breach obscures nothing. His camera presents the viewer with very clear images. However, their meanings are ambiguous and become more unclear by the film's end. In Psycho, we understand what happens to Janet Leigh's character. But in La Ventura, we are left to wonder what has become of Lia Massari's Anna.
Anna!
Anna!
Just as camera movement can lure us in, so too can it be used to alienate, to hold us at an arm's length and break the illusion that we're watching a film at all. Here, the breach serves to distance us from the characters within. In Godard's 1967 film Weekend, he even concludes with the title, End of Cinema, and it does feel as if his goal is to break the illusion of watching a movie. With long takes like the 7-minute and 40-second traffic jam, or the scene in which the camera continuously circles a barnyard while the characters recite Mozart's Piano Sonata No. 18. Godard's camera seems completely preoccupied with rupturing the idea of film itself.
Elle est quand même vache. Même un philosophe, on n'a pas le droit de le brûler.
Je crois que c'est des personnages imaginaires.
Pourquoi elle pleure alors?
Je sais pas. Allez, bien.
Deeply inspired by the work of German theater practitioner Bertolt Brecht, the film's anti-narrative style prevents us from getting into any story or plot. This is supported by the fact that the killing, wreckage, bloodshed, and dead bodies are obviously staged. It is clear that we're not meant to identify with these characters in any emotional way, and the fact that they themselves are aware that they're in a film underscores this.
Même qu'elles sont même pas encore finies.
Ça fait chier, ce film.
Where Godard's camera leaves viewers feeling completely detached, another filmmaker inspired by the work of Brecht took a different approach. Rainer Werner Fassbinder's 1974 film, Ali Fear Eats the Soul, again utilizes camera work that serves to distance us from the characters within. However, here it's not at the expense of our emotional identification with the movie's protagonists. In the film, Emmy, a 60-year-old widow, finds herself drawn and eventually married to Ali, a much younger Moroccan migrant worker, resulting in her alienation from her children, co-workers, and neighbors.
Doch, Herr Wachtmeister, sind doch alles Araber. Sie wissen doch, was das für welche sind, mit Bomben und so.
Throughout the film, Fassbinder delicately frames their burgeoning relationship before implicitly beginning to provoke our position as spectators. In this scene, the camera starts at a distance. We are placed in the perspective of the disapproving spectators. But as Emmy breaks down, the camera pulls us closer. As she and Ali express their love for one another, we are with them and emotionally connected to them.
Ich liebe dich auch.
Ich mehr.
Wie viel?
So viel.
However, at the height of this emotional connection, Fassbinder pulls the camera, and therefore us too, back into the position as observers. We take on the same judgmental gaze as the spectators around them. This movement is a confrontation, where Fassbinder willfully erodes the illusion of the narrative to remind us of the actual realities underlying such a relationship. But what about a film that, in its revising angle, doesn't look to distance, but to immerse? Here, the camera's movement immerses us in a moment, a period of time, perhaps even a memory. Alfonso Cuarón's 2018 film Roma is a highly personal account of remembrance, of memory. The film focuses on Cleo, a stand-in for Lebo, the live-in domestic worker who helped raise Cuarón during his 1970s childhood growing up in Mexico City. And the camera is focused on her, but importantly, this is not a film about nostalgia. The way the camera moves matters, the way it watches, observes, and it's unique in its mode of observation.
I was not interested in the nostalgic approach to memory. I was interested about the past from the standpoint of the present.
We are with Cleo narratively, but our experience is not tied to hers. Scenes are captured perpendicularly to the camera. They play out before us and are often accompanied by a recurring pan. The pan is sustained even as Cleo moves back and forth within its frame. It is both with her as she goes about her work around the house, but also somehow separate from her. Other times the camera slowly drifts, picking out details around a room, only to later find her in the frame as she tenderly wakes one of the children. And this move, the slow panning frame that takes in the action in an unbroken shot, is important to Cuarón's films. It reverberates across his work. This mode of movement feels different. Instead of putting us in the position of a spectator, it puts us in the position of an inquirer.
Y Tu Mamá también opened for me the door into the inquiry that I've been exercising with cinema. We started this thing of doing, giving as much importance to the foreground as to the background.
Much has been discussed about the way Cuarón contrasts the foreground and the background in his films. Inside the station wagon, characters may overlook the police cruiser pulling ahead. Perhaps they have not taken note, but Cuarón's camera certainly has. There's a social consciousness to these movements.
No, pero con descuento de cliente antiguo. Ay, déjenme ir a preguntar a la patrona, ahorita vengo.
Again, in the scene in Roma, the camera begins its rhythmic pan, an unbroken frame that slowly turns its attention to the streets below. But in its move, it does not echo the rising tension and panic of the narrative. It is calm, deliberate, and steady. This is Cuarón's consciousness of the present revisiting the past. And it's in the cadence of this pan where the movement becomes a breach, that imperceptible rift between the work and the author, the means by which the author takes a stance in relation to it. What started out as an outing to look for a crib for Cleo's baby has revealed itself to be the Corpus Christi massacre of June 10, 1971. But in this slow panning camera, we are made the inquirers of the frame.